Back to the show, Talk with Your Doc, with me, Sarah Miller, and we are talking about diet and health. And Sarah, you were mentioning before the break about source of protein, and you mentioned that having vegetable or vegetarian source of proteins like lentils or nuts, it is much more healthier than the protein source from the animals, like, and it reduces the risk of cancer as well and many other diseases.
It can, yes.
So we can have a one serving of nuts instead of having a serving of beef, probably, then, to keep ourselves healthy and happy.
Yeah, it's about really looking at the context of the diet overall and how many portions you're having. So reducing, it's really about balance, finding a balance of both kinds.
Right. Now tell us about the carbohydrates. What are the good sources of carbohydrates? Are there good carbohydrates, bad carbohydrates?
Sure. Poor carbohydrates really have a bad name. Over the last few years, they've been what I call villainized in our culture, right? Where carbohydrate is essential for good health. It is the main source of energy to our brain and central nervous system, and so it's really essential to be, incorporating regular sources of carbohydrate. But you're right. There are healthier sources of carbohydrate and not so healthier sources of carbohydrate, and unfortunately, our diet in our society has increased in the amount of refined or processed type of carbohydrates, basically sugar that is added to a lot of the foods and beverages that we consume because it helps to make food more convenient but still tastes good, and we sort of get hooked on that sugar. Healthy sources of carbohydrate are what we want to think of as complex sources, so not necessarily as easily digestible, things like whole grains, fruits, vegetables, of course. Again, pulses and lentils and legumes are examples of sources of sort of high fiber and complex carbohydrates.
So good carbohydrate, I understand, is any carbohydrate or any sugar which comes with the fiber.
That's right.
Right? Like, so eating a fruit is better than drinking a fruit juice, probably.
That's right.
Right?
That's
so
right.
What happens? Why we call it as a good? Why the carbohydrate with the fiber is good? Just because it elevates our sugar slowly, or how does it happen?
And so exactly what you talked about, the more refined a carbohydrate, the more that bran has been stripped away from the component of the carbohydrate. And so the less refined usually means that it has higher fiber, which generally means a lower rise in our blood sugar. So we talked earlier about portion sizes, and if we eat a large portion, say, of carbohydrate-based foods, our blood sugars go up higher and then come down quicker, typically. When we're including foods that are more whole grain or intact, like fruit and vegetable, our body has to digest that a lot slower. So the rise in blood sugar is much slower and takes longer to come down, which typically means that we're more satisfied between meal to meal. So that's the importance of including those types of foods.
So one of the concepts now coming up is the glycemic index of the food, and somebody was mentioning that you should eat the food which has low GI index to watch your weight.
Right.
Can you explain us about this GI or glycemic index?
So glycemic index is a ranking of a carbohydrate-based food's ability to, or how quickly it causes a rise in the sugar. What it doesn't account for is the amount of actual carbohydrate in the food. It usually is related to the fiber content and again, that digestion of the sugar. Foods that are very low in GI are things like meats and dairy, anything with protein and fat. And we think of high GI foods as being more of the refined type carbohydrates. So high glycemic index foods would be things like short grain white rice, rice cakes, white bread, baker style russet potatoes, things like that. Low GI foods, alternatives to those, would be basmati rice or whole grain brown rice, whole grain crackers like Ryvitas or stone wheat thins, 100% whole grain breads or pumpernickel, those darker type of breads, are what we would see as lower GI index foods. Pulses and legumes are also examples of low GI.
So when we go to buy, say, cereals, in the shelf at the shopping store, what should we be looking for?
you should be looking for 100% whole grain, or it won't say 100%, but it'll say whole grain in the ingredient list. Cereals are a really good example because there's lots of cereals out there, but many cereals are very refined. Something as simple as Rice Krispies, even bran flakes, are considered to be a high GI food. Lower GI cereal alternatives would be things like bran buds, which have a source of psyllium or soluble fiber. Oat bran or oatmeal are alternatives to those higher GI type cereals.
So they say hot cereals are better than the cold ones. Is
Right.
that- So we should make fresh cereals.
Exactly. Cooked oatmeal, cream of wheat, even those types of whole grain cereals are going to be lower GI index.
So there is a new concept about nuts in the weight management. When I was young, I was told that not to eat nuts. But now people are saying that nuts are good for your health.
Right.
And they help you to reduce the weight. Can you explain us a little bit about it?
So in terms of health, nuts also fall into that cardioprotective aspect that we were talking about with lentils because of the plant sterols. It's got naturally low in sodium, high in unsaturated type fat. It's also high in protein. So nuts can be very satisfying when used as a snack. What you need to be careful with nuts is that because they're high in dietary fat, and I talked about the similar calories in saturated and unsaturated fat, nuts are very high in calorie, and they also can be a food that we can tend to overeat. So the recommendation is not to exceed about 30 to 45 grams of nuts in a day, which is about an ounce to an ounce and a half. I brought an example of that right here. So it's a very small amount of nuts.
That's just fill the palm.
Just filling the palm of my hand, where often we hear of a patient, eating that as a snack right out of the tin. Could be up to a cup or two of nuts or seeds. Another thing I hear a lot is sunflower seeds. People are consuming a large quantity or portion of sunflower seeds. That's very calorie rich and is not going to help you maintain your weight.
So which are the good nuts, which are the bad nuts?
Nuts are all generally the same in terms of their calorie content and their nutrient profile, if you will, in terms of the type of unsaturated fat. Some of the lower calorie nuts are things like peanuts and almonds, and some of the higher calorie nuts are things like walnuts and macadamia nuts. Not to say that you shouldn't enjoy those, but they are on the higher end.
But just eat full of palm, not more.
What's important is the portion size.
Yes, portion size. So take-home message from today's discussion is that we should divide our meals, frequent meals, over the period of every 4 hours, and make sure that we watch carbohydrate calorie contents and the protein calorie contents and the fat calorie contents.
Right.
So you said protein is 20%, 30% is carbohydrate, and 50% is the fat.
50% carbohydrate, 20% protein, 30% fat.
Right.
Yes, for general recommendation of overall calories.
Right.
But portion sizes are really important.
Yes, not to eat too much at the same time.
Yes.
Thank you, Sarah, for the show. Coming
You're
for
very
the show.
welcome.
Really appreciate
Anytime.
it. Thank you, everyone.